Good afternoon, everybody, and a big welcome to all the teachers who have joined us here today. My name is Kim from Kimberlin Education, and I'll be your host for this 1 hour of professional development brought to you by the Australian Football League. We are really excited to be hosting this session and to introduce you to a suite of new resources for primary school teachers on teaching the fundamentals of AFL. This webinar is specifically targeted at exploring two of the many fundamental movement skills crucial to the game of AFL. Today, we're going to be looking at bouncing and handballing. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which we are recording from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land you are tuning in from and further extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today's webinar. Let's begin with a few introductions. We're very fortunate to have an AFL great with us here today. I'd like to introduce you to Steph Chiocci. Steph plays the position of midfielder and is the current captain of Collingwood's AFLW team, a position she's held for 6 seasons. Welcome, Steph. And we also have Sam McKenzie joining us today. Sam is the coaching, content and learning lead at the AFL. Rebecca Marshall is also online with us. Beck is the National Schools Manager at the AFL. So a big welcome to Steph, Beck and Sam. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today to impart your AFL wisdom to all the teachers attending. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Throughout the session, we would love to hear your questions, so please feel free to pop those into the chat box. Towards the end of the session, we'll have a dedicated Q&A time where our AFL ambassador and representative will be able to address any AFL specific questions you may have. So let's get into things. A quick overview of what's going to be covered in the next hour. We will review the learning objective, and Beck from AFL will run through the rationale behind the national program. We will discuss the pedagogical approach and then move into the heart of the webinar, which is teaching fundamentals. And this is where we'll hear from our experts, Steph and Sam. Following that, there will be time for our Q&A, and we'll finish by discussing the supplementary leadership and healthy eating and nutrition resources that have been developed to work alongside the main AFL teaching and learning frameworks. Like any good lesson, we have some objectives for the session on the screen here. We want to understand a range of strategies used to encourage play and support diverse learning styles within the HPE classroom. We want to develop an understanding of fundamental AFL skills and to know how to facilitate these with students in year 3 and 4, but also the years above and below as well. And to learn from experts in the field through the sharing of best practice. And of course, don't forget to add this hour to the maintenance of your professional development. To make life easier, we've linked this session to 2 outcomes of the professional standards for you. You might want to quickly jot those down. Okay, over to Beck now, who will speak to the rationale behind the national program that's been developed for teachers. Welcome, Beck.
Thanks, Kim. And hello, everyone. Yeah, keen to talk about, firstly on the slide here, it says, what is the AFL? And we do acknowledge that teachers and students across the country have varying knowledge and experience with our game. So to help that, if you do have a class learning about what AFL is and what all the rules are, we do have some resources on our new platform, which is found at play.afl/schools. And on that platform, you can find a 2-page guide of what the AFL is. And there's also a pretty cool video that you can access as well, which talks you through how our game is played. But talking now around why we do have a national schools program, just over 12 months ago, we met with teachers across the country to understand how they'd like to engage with sport, both in their classroom and also out on the sports field. And from that, that research and from chatting to teachers around the country, there were three main points that we based our strategy and approach on. And they were that teachers wanted high quality curriculum-based resources that they could implement easily into their classrooms and also their practical PE lessons. That any information that we provided, it was really important that teachers could navigate that really simply. And finally, that you all really valued professional learning. So hence why we are here today. We now have over 77 resources available on our new website, which you can download it and effectively pick up and use. We also now have sessions like we are in today to support your professional learning. We also have a range of face-to-face sessions that we can provide to teachers to support you with feeling comfortable in implementing AFL into your own curriculum. And we'll launch some in term one, we'll launch a new self-paced learning management tool, which again can support your own knowledge and growth of your understanding of AFL and how to implement that with your students. Holistically, our view is that, and what we do know is that when students are having a great experience, they don't necessarily always understand that that's a learning experience. And we just feel that through the resources we've created and the support tools we've created for teachers to be able to implement them effectively, that essentially you can have lesson plans ready to go and created in your own classrooms, but also that students are getting outside, getting active and getting value from our programs as well. Thanks, Kim. I'll pass back to you.
Great. Thanks, Beck. And it's great to hear about the foundations that the program's been built on. That includes, of course, our pedagogical approach. So several approaches were taken into consideration, and we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing these. So we'll look at how to differentiate lessons using the change it up approach. Then we'll look at the free play and guided discovery continuum. And finally, we'll take a quick peek at the AFL teaching resources and how they're structured. We know as teachers that classrooms are full of diverse learners. So Change It is an easy acronym for teachers to remember when considering how to modify games, skill building, and activities in the PE classroom. It's worth pointing out early that there is no expectation to modify all of these aspects when you're teaching a new skill or implementing a game. As teachers, you know your students best, so we encourage you to think about what will be in the best interests for your individual students' needs. So let's have a look at what the Change It acronym represents. The C is for coaching style. Consider your own teaching style. Are there ways you can vary the questions, the language, the way that you communicate with your students? H is how to score or win. Be inventive with different ways that students can score or win. The area, you can change the size or shape of the playing area to make the activity more challenging or more achievable depending on your students. Similarly, N for numbers, adapt the team size and positions. G is for game rules. You can get creative with rules and also encourage your students to help develop these, and that fits in with the curriculum requirement of having students come up with their own games. You can adjust the equipment, give alternative options for the students as often as you can. And I is for inclusion. Modify to include all learners and abilities. Give options and ask students for their input. And finally, T for time. Increase or decrease time for games, activities, drills, and reflections. Each lesson of the Stage 2 primary program includes 5 to 10 minutes of exploration, free play, or guided discovery. Now, as you can see in the diagram, play-based learning is a continuum, with the focus shifting between the student and the teacher leading the learning. The role of the teacher is to move between these different modes depending on the intended learning outcome. Exploration, free play, and guided discovery provides students with an opportunity to explore and develop their skills in a less structured environment, while simultaneously supporting their social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development. So what's the difference between these terms? Free play or exploration is free from any set or imposed rules or guidelines. Here, students have complete autonomy. Teachers and adults are just observers. Free play is a great way for students to explore new concepts, such as how a football moves when bounced, and we'll look at that a bit more today. The observations made during free play can also be used to guide and shape lessons. Other examples of free play are playing with objects or sporting equipment, creating and initiating games, solving puzzles, all kinds of physical and outdoor play. Next is guided discovery. This is teacher assisted and is a collaboration between teachers and students. Guided discovery is scaffolded in a way that has clear learning intentions, yet still encourages students to freely explore, wonder, and problem solve within the context of new and unfamiliar ideas. Teachers work alongside students to initiate or create games or play together. During this type of play, teachers should aim to provide feedback, give demonstrations, and comment on new discoveries as they're made. Maybe we could try this. Can anyone suggest a way we could do this differently? Wow, what did you just discover? Guided discovery gives focus while still allowing students the freedom to explore. And of course, games. And these bring in more structured learning and are managed or observed by a teacher. Games have clear rules and boundaries, but still promote a sense of fun and playfulness. And finally, outside the play-based learning zone is structured learning. This is facilitated by teachers with a clear learning intention. In the context of the primary program, structured learning is used for building specific AFL skills. And finally, the structure of the resources. The primary program consists of a number of resources to assist both students and teachers in their learning and facilitation of the lessons. So for teachers, there is an overview and preamble, which includes the pedagogical approaches that we've just spoken about. There's lesson summaries, complete with coaching tips, ways to adapt for diverse learners, and various opportunities for formative assessment. All of the lessons are, of course, curriculum aligned to ACAR and NESA and the Victorian curriculum. And for those teachers who are keen to do some summative assessment, there are ready-to-use rubrics, again aligned to each curriculum. And for the students, there are worksheets for pre and post self-assessment. Every lesson includes student success criteria. There are a wealth of videos for both games and skill building, which also double as instructions for teachers who would like to see the games and skills in action. And there are plenty of opportunities for self-reflection. Okay, now we move on to the exciting part of the session, teaching the fundamentals. It's a great opportunity for teachers to see the videos that are accessible within the program. So let's give you an example of one of those, which is how to bounce.
Welcome to NAB AFL Auskick. Here are some tips on
bouncing!
There are 5 steps to bouncing a footy. Grip, step, aim, push and catch. Hold the football with 2 hands, with your righting hand slightly over the laces. Step forward with the opposite leg to your righting hand. Aim where you're going to bounce the ball, about a step in front of your body. Push the ball down rather than throw it, with your righting hand trying to get the ball to bounce on its underside just behind its point. Your fingers point to the ground as you let go of the ball. Keep your arms out in front of you and hands open, ready for the ball to bounce back to you. If your Auskickers are struggling to get the hang of it, or it's their first attempt at bouncing, it's a good idea to start on your knees and work your way up to standing. Then walking and running. So remember, the 5 steps are grip, step, aim, push, catch. Good luck!
What a great video. What a great way to explain to teachers and to kids how this skill is done. But we have on the call our experts, Steph and Sam. So I'm going to pass over to you guys to see if there's some more that you can add to ways that we can teach this effectively in our classrooms. Steph, I might jump straight in with you.
Thank you very much. And apologies for my voice. I'm not feeling too great, so bear with me on this one. Firstly, very, very tough skill to teach. I think it's really important that that's mentioned. It is extremely hard at any level. So teaching it to kids is even harder. The thing with this is kids can get quite frustrated with bouncing a ball. So just reiterate to them that it is okay and it is a tough skill, and it's something that can definitely be worked on. And as we've had a look at the video, it's all about limiting, I suppose, the environment that can help, that will make those mistakes. So my biggest suggestion with bouncing the ball would be in an environment that's quite closed and away from the environment, so inside to start. That way you're not contesting with the wind or anything like that. So that sort of environment where it's quite stable. And obviously if you're on the grass, you can have potholes and things like that, which obviously we'll avoid, but you want to make sure that the environment is as stable as possible. It's okay to have two hands on the ball, and we saw that in the video. And I think a lot of the times when you talk to footy coaches and staff, it's all about the one-handed bounce, and that's where kids sort of think they need to get to. Yes, however, it is okay to start with two hands, especially when they've got such little hands. And what I've done in the past is, and it is time-consuming, but actually putting stickers on the ball to show them where to hold the ball. And that includes both hands. So it might be the guiding hand. I'm right-handed, so it'd be my left hand that's the guiding hand, but I'd have the stickers on the top right of the ball, sort of where my fingers would sit. That's a really good visual cue for kids. And I think we get a lot out of that. I've certainly had some success with that. Another tip in terms of the hand positioning is sort of having like an exit point for the kids whereby they need to tick off the technique box before they move on to the next. And the way I usually do that is with inside, so on a wall, where the students will need to show their technique and show their hand placement on the ball and sort of stick it to the wall. I know that sounds really silly, but it's sort of that pushing motion. And they can obviously use the two hands for that as well, because that's the motion we're going with. A lot of the common errors, which were again mentioned in those videos, are throwing the ball or trying to smash it to the ground, thinking that it's going to come back to you. It really is that push motion. So hand positioning is key. Starting on your knees is beneficial. Obviously, limiting the distance between the ball and the ground is less room for error. So really stripping it right back and starting on your knees and just pushing the ball into the ground. Again, we spoke about it in the last webinar about ball handling skills. Okay, so starting off with those basics, going from two knees to one knee, as you saw in the video, is sort of that side action because you're going to be stepping next to the ball eventually. And obviously we're doing things with both sides of our body, so getting used to that balance. And then obviously we progress from that to standing. Another tip that I've had written down here is to have a polydot or some sort of marker of where you actually want the ball to land as a target for the kids. So even if they are progressing to walking, you can have obviously polydots or stickers on the ground, or probably not cones, but next to the cone of where you want to be bouncing the ball. So give them that sort of target. And you can also put a sticker or a marker on the ball showing exactly what spot you need the ball to hit the surface to then come back to you. But very, very tough skill and one that can really frustrate students and teachers, but probably needs to dedicate a bit more time to this than say the kicking and the handballing. Sam, I don't know if you've got much more to add to that, but that's sort of a snapshot of how I would be teaching it at those levels.
Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive there, Steph. That's really awesome. I had the same point around, don't worry. It's really hard. Even the pros get it wrong in games. It's a tough skill. It's a weird shaped ball. It doesn't come back when you want it. If the ground's wet or anything like that, it completely changes the way the ball bounces. So it is actually a really difficult skill to master. And by the time when they're playing in the game, you are bouncing on the run. There's not a lot of bouncing standing still. So it makes it even harder. So it's kind of one of those ones you can say to the kids, and be prepared as a coach or a teacher that it's probably going to be a bit chaotic and there's going to be balls bouncing everywhere, but that's all right. I think with bouncing and then even with handballing as well, just general ball ability. And I know Steph and I talked about that on the last webinar, but just that general ball ability and actually understanding how a ball moves, and that's a really fundamental skill, and that actually really helps then when you're trying to bounce the ball, because you actually get an understanding of what happens if the ball, if you don't quite bounce it right, like if the ball's not facing in the right direction, where it's going to end up. One thing in my experience that I found is kids are actually, they're pretty good. Like if you hold a ball sideways this way and you say, if I go to bounce like this, what way is it going to go? They all tend to know, oh, it's going to go that way. And then if I hold it like this and I bounce it, it's going to go that way. They understand that. And so when you can talk them through that a bit and get their input, and then you can show, okay, so if I bounce it like this with the ball facing down like that, what's going to happen? Oh, that'll come back to me. And so they get to understand, oh, there's a part of the ball that we probably want to hit or try and hit, because that makes the ball come back to me. So that's one little tip that I found has been really effective, just to get them to understand. Some of them will think you need to bounce the ball right on the tip of it, and then it's going to go everywhere. Some of them sort of, you see a lot of kids will bounce it and it goes forward because they hit the wrong, sort of the back part of the ball. So it's really cool to kind of get them to understand, how the ball might move depending on where it hits, and that teaches them a bit of that overall sort of fundamental ball skill as well. I really like Steph's point around the surfaces. I'd also recommend, like if early on a hard surface, if it's asphalt or you've got a hardwood floor in a gym, just takes away some of the extra bits like grass. And if your ground is a bit bumpy or it gets a bit wet and it's a bit dewy, that's not really conducive to bouncing. So if you can remove that just to help them out, it's a little sort of constraint that if you can get rid of that one, that's quite handy. So doing it on a hard surface first is pretty good. One thing that I see a lot of when we do bouncing, and Steph touched on it a little bit, is they'll bounce from too high up. So that's one of the challenges you'll see. They'll sort of start, they think, oh yeah, I'm going to bring it up and come down. And you're just adding way more room for error. Like if anyone's ever coached basketball, when they teach you to dribble, the best dribblers, they all bounce from the hip. So the ball never really comes up too high, and that allows you to have much more control. And it's very similar with an AFL footy. We want to bounce from the hip. So often we don't want to be big motion. We want to reduce that as much as we can and come from our hip and push down. I know the video kind of talks about that, but that's an easy error that you might see. And just the further that you end up dropping the ball from, the more chance there is the ball's going to do something funny on the way down. And we just want to reduce as much of that as we can. One other thing I'll talk about is for those of you, especially if the kids have sort of handled it from stationary, is that the ball does actually bounce a little bit differently when you're on the move. Like the faster you're going, the less you want it to come back at you, because you're trying to push the ball out. And so as kids are getting better at this, you can start to talk to them about, how far out do you need to push the ball to then meet the ball where it's going to be. My favourite one example of this is if you've seen Buddy Franklin, I think it was 2010 against Essendon, he kicks this amazing goal where he runs down the wing and he has about 3 or 4 bounces, and not one of those bounces are one that you would teach to a kid. That's a great bounce. It sort of slides off the grass and he's kind of just getting at his fingertips, but because he's running so quick, he's got to push the ball out so far in front that you don't want to, if you end up getting it on the point like that, it's going to come back and go past you. So you push it out. And so that's a really cool, as kids get a bit better at it, really just get them to explore, get them to run pretty quick and say, just have a go at it and try and push it out and see how far you need to push it out to then get it. Because like I say, it is a tough skill, but one of the best goals of all time. Some pretty ugly bouncing in it, but very effective and it works.
Great. So much in there that we could talk about. I love the starting inside and the predictable surface, but that's also going to contain the balls that would otherwise go in every direction, I guess. Steph, you also gave us a few of the progressions, and I love the word you used, an exit technique, and using each one as a step, as a permission to move to the next level. But we talked in our last session about the need for repetition, and I guess I haven't yet heard from either of you things that we can do to make this a bit more fun. How do you add fun to this? Because you've both mentioned frustration. So how do we make this, a positive experience? And so we want success, but how do we make it fun too?
Yeah, to your point about being indoors with the surface, like expect that balls are going to go everywhere, especially with this skill. I had written down here to a little game, like a relay game with little mini hurdles. Number one, it includes the proper technique and movement. You're coming to the side of the hurdle, you're stepping first, and then you're bouncing the ball over the hurdle. So to Sam's point before as well, where you're judging the distance, you can do some little relay races with that. And obviously you can alter the height of the hurdle as well, if need be, for those who sort of are progressing pretty quickly. But anything to do with relay races, even if they only have to bounce the ball once or twice, rather, over a 20-metre span, if you want to increase that, you can increase that to 3, 4, 5 times for that repetition. But we all know kids like repetition and competition as well. So I think something like that would work pretty well with this sort of skill.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on top of that, I'm a big fan of a bit of organised chaos. And so, if we want repetition, like one ball per kid is probably going to give us the best result in terms of just generating within a session lots of opportunities to bounce, because it is a very individual skill. You don't have to use anyone else. So even like adding just a bounce into other fun games that you might play. So for example, you could just play stuck in the mud, but everyone has to bounce the ball. And then you can layer in other skills to that as well. So you bounce the ball, and then if you get tagged, instead of someone stuck in the mud and someone goes through your legs, you've just got a handball to someone and they handball it back to you, or you swap balls, or there's lots of little opportunities. But as soon as you're running around, you need to bounce the ball, or you get stuck and you've got to do 10 bounces in a row stationary to then get free. So you're just adding in the bounce to the other fun games that the kids play. So there's a bit of chaos. They're moving around. Obviously, the better bounces that they are, the more these games sort of work. But as long as you're okay with a little bit of chaos, and again, your focus as a coach is, am I seeing them trying to bounce the ball a lot? They don't have to get it right all the time. They just need to be trying the skill. And that allows you, as a coach, I'm looking at that. And even if those balls are going everywhere, I see them all trying it, then that's a great result. And because repetition is so important, this gives them the opportunity to get as many reps as they can within the time that you've sort of allowed for it.
Yeah. I do have one last question to ask about this particular one, and anyone who's on the call who wants to pop a question in the chat, and we'll get back to that later in the session, please feel free. But we talked about changing the equipment, and I know that the whole skill here with bouncing a football is that it's an unusual shape. Is this one of those activities that you would start with a round ball and progress to the oval shaped football?
Absolutely, you can. You could start with anything that the students can handle. I actually thought of starting with and I have done it before, with a rugby ball. They're a little bit thicker, a little bit fatter, and a little bit bigger. Obviously, in the centre points, there's a larger surface area, so that can be quite handy as well. But I think Sam will agree, any type of ball, even if it is a tennis ball, doesn't necessarily have to be a bigger ball. It could be any type of ball that's round to start with, or a rugby ball. That's sort of where I would probably start.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Steph. There's anything like that. I mean, the skill itself is pushing the ball into the ground and then catching it, because it's slightly different to basketball, which is more like a dribble. So this is very much like I'm bouncing it and then catching it. So anything that allows that in kids to kind of to learn that and that motion, I'll push the ball down and then it comes back to me. And obviously a round ball is going to be the easiest to start with. And so if that's where the kids are at, that's where the kids are at. And so it's a great place to start. And then I really love the idea around a ball that has a bit easier shape to deal with. That's kind of between a footy ball and a round ball. So like a rugby ball might be pretty handy, or a ball that's shaped like that.
Brilliant. Well, our second fundamental skill today is one that I don't think exists in any other game. So we're definitely going to be relying on our experts. Let's watch the video and then we'll hand back over.
Welcome to NAB AFL Auskick. Here are some tips on
handballing.
There are 4 steps required to perform a handball. Make a pancake, feet apart, make a fist, and scoop the ice cream. Hold out the hand that you don't draw and write with flat, like a pancake. Rest the ball on top, like it's a scoop of ice cream on the pancake. Stand with your feet staggered, keeping the same foot forward as the pancake hand. With your other hand, your writing hand, make a fist, keeping your thumb on the outside of the fist, not the inside. Hit the ball as if you're scooping the ice cream off the pancake into a cone. Catch your fist in the pancake hand once the ball has been launched. And that's how you handball. So remember, the 4 steps are: 1. Make a pancake. 2. Feet apart. 3. Make a fist. 4. Scoop the ice cream. Good luck!
That's a great technique and a great video. Sam, how about we start with you first on this one? What are your tips and pearls of wisdom?
Well, I really love the analogy things that really resonates with the kids a lot and helps them to kind of understand, because it's such a unique skill to footy. And so I'm a big believer in being able to use that to try and help them understand kind of what the different parts of the body you're wanting to do. I guess kind of a couple of things that kind of probably start just with this, more so with some of the challenges that you might see or you might get when coaching the handball. A couple of things that, because it is like you're kind of using your fist to hit the ball out. What you'll find is they'll really try and punch it. Like they'll actually think they've got to absolutely smash the thing to get it, the ball to get it to where they want. And so what they'll use is all sort of one arm and one fist, which actually, if you watch the best handball and stuff, it's almost like a full body pass. It's just like passing the ball in any other game. And so you're using a lot more of your hips and your shoulders and moving through the ball. So what you'll see is that kids, I think the technical term for it is reduce the degrees of freedom. So they stiffen up a little bit to make the skill a bit easier. So they might have really straight arms rather than a bent elbow and those sort of things. So we're wanting to try and make them a little bit more loose with it, and that allows you to get a little bit more power into the handball. If you watch the best ones, a lot of the ones, you can hardly even hear them hit the ball as they handball it, because all the momentum's coming through sort of their chest and their torso as they're kind of twisting with it. And so that's something just to keep an eye out for. And another, you see the same thing with what they call the pancake. So your hand that's holding the ball. What will happen is a lot of people will pull that hand away, and then you lose all of the momentum that you can generate through your body. So they'll pull it away, and now the ball's just floating in air, and you've got to try and make contact with it so you don't get any of the momentum that you generate from your body. So there's something to look out for. And an easy thing to do for the kids is actually, hey, you need to hit it out of your hand. So you use the scoop it out and actually finish with your hand on your pancake. That's something that can help, because what then happens is they can use all that momentum to generate the ball going through. And so we see that a lot, because that's where kids will get a sore hand as well, because they're actually just punching the ball rather than kind of trying to pass it and use their body. And that's kind of one of the biggest challenges that I see when teaching a handball, and something that you can kind of just keep an eye out and then just try a few little different things with the kids to try and get them to hit the ball out of the hand and use some of the other, how do they get a bit more power? So you might say, hey, we want you to handball as far as you can, get more power, move into it. That can kind of help them as a bit of a cue.
Great. Steph?
Yeah, Sam's done a very good job at summarising it there. To the analogy, I use a similar one, and I mean, it's always good to have different ones up your sleeve, but I've often used, you've got the bread. So you've got your bread as your non-dominant hand. You've got the hot dog or the sausage, right? Might resonate more, not sure. And then you've got the sauce. And what you're doing, obviously, is got the bread, the hot dog, and then you're squirting the sauce in. Obviously, very mindful of the thumb being on the outside, and we'll often question the students as to why we do that, and make sure that they know that, they're obviously putting themselves at risk of breaking their thumb and hurting themselves. So that analogy I found worked really well as the pancake one. But for some reason, bread and hot dogs, they like to have a bit of a giggle with that. Again, you notice with this clip in particular, there was no talk of how the ball floats through the air. So obviously we know we want it to spin backwards and all those sorts of things. And at this level, that's not paramount. However, if you want to start to introduce that, I find it's the angle of the hand, of the base hand, the supporting hand is really important, and angling it up slightly so that the ball's on a slight angle. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not going to go into what degrees, but we're angling it up at about 30 odd degrees. And a good little activity to sort of help them catch their hand is to handball to yourself first. And that can be as simple as just handballing it up and catching it again, ball handling, to then progress into a bit of a challenge where instead of, punching, Sam was saying they like to punch it, see how high they can do it and how many claps they can get in before they catch the ball. And that motion itself should start to get the ball sort of spinning the way that it should. Because I find that a lot of the time, like Sam said, students will go to handball, pull their hand away, and then it's just you're reaching for it rather than obviously sliding it in to catch your fist. And then it sort of comes to that technique and how the ball should move. But it's a fun little fundamental because you can play all sorts of games with it. Obviously tag ball, you can do a little bit of end ball, you can do all those sorts of things. You can try and shoot into goals, whether it's soccer goals, footy goals, to the backboard if you're inside, to the wall with targets. So, yeah, a lot of fun, the handballing.
Yeah, certainly one of the things I've observed is kids throwing the ball up and trying to punch, and there's a lot in these techniques that tries to minimise that, but it's always there, isn't it? That throw, punch.
It is just important to sort of reiterate that the guiding hand, and we've said it before, does a lot of the work. If you watch some of the best handballers in the game, Taylor Adams, Paddy Cripps, they use that guiding hand to generate force. So really making an emphasis on you must slide your fist into that guiding hand, into that pancake, into that bread, and keep it there for as long as possible.
Yeah. And I know that when kids start playing AFL, when they're just beginning to learn, that they often do a panic throw rather than a handball. So do you try and encourage that any time you've got the AFL football in your hand that you're only hand passing and not throwing?
Yeah, I mean it's a fundamental skill of the game. So you try and encourage it. I mean, I'm sort of not one to discourage the kids too much. Like if that's what they end up doing, that's what they end up doing. But you're certainly trying to encourage them to use the handball as much as they can. And if you're playing a little game and it happens sometimes, kid gets a bit throws it. You can say, hey, have a handball. Remember, we handball it, and you can kind of but keep the game going with it. So you sort of bring it back and say, instead of giving it, especially early on, I'm not going to penalise you for it. It's just now, but I need you to handball it because that's how we play, and that can just sort of reiterate it. And Steph was talking about like even, like handballing to yourself, but just again, it comes back to a lot of that fundamental ball skill work. Just in your hands. Like if you watch it, I'm sure like Steph would be the same when. The picture that she's got up probably on media day, she's got the ball in hand and she'll probably just be standing there handballing to herself and mucking around and just moving it around. And you'll see a lot of players, they'll just kind of be spinning the ball around in their hand with a handball. And so just giving them opportunity to kind of explore what happens if I hit it like this, where does it go if I hit it like this? And so I'm big on that allowing exploration and sometimes trying to, and hey, how creative ways you can handball it. Can you handball it over your head? Can you handball it through your legs? Can you handball it behind your back? Can you handball it high? Can you handball it low? The best handballers just kind of get the ball where they need it to get to. And I know we're talking about little kids now, but you can set them up for that exploration by giving them lots of cool little tricks to try and handball in different ways. And even when they're learning and just learning, it's a really cool way to do that. And then that's kind of at one end when you're trying to really challenge them and explore. And then if you need to bring it all the way back, again, I know in our Auskick where you handball just a round ball as well, that's fine. Or some of those sort of slightly squishy ones, or some of the plastic ones which kind of ping off a little bit, just to get them understanding that, because sometimes that is a little bit easier, just to have a round ball in your hand and handball. And it just goes back to, again, a lot of the points we've made on a lot of these skills is that you can just dial up or dial down the challenge depending on where the kids are at. And so having a whole lot of different balls, whether they're footballs, basketball, tennis balls in your pack, allows you to be able to do that and change it up for the kids.
Yeah, great. Well, look, it is question and answer time, and I've been asking a few questions, but if anyone on the call has a question they'd like to ask, feel free to pop it in the chat. And we do have a question here, which is, at what stage do you encourage the students to bounce or handball with their non-preferred hand? Where does that fit in the progression?
Geez, well, I hope it's at 33 years of age, because I still haven't mastered that. It's a really good question. I think it comes down to, look, personally, I don't think it's overly important. I mean, Sam might disagree with me, but very rarely do students and players get an opportunity to bounce on their opposite hand. However, it could be really important for ball handling, and then being able to kick on your opposite foot, because I know I see a lot of students still using a double hand ball drop when they're kicking on their opposite foot. So that sort of motion is really important for other skills. But in terms of the importance of being able to bounce the ball with your opposite hand, I very rarely see it, and I dare say there wouldn't be too many footballers that can do it. But I mean, I haven't done the research on it, but you don't see it too often. You don't see it too often.
No, I'd agree with you, Steph, on that. Like a bounce on your non-preferred is pretty rare, because if you're bouncing in a game, you've got a bit of space, and so you're able to use, and because it'll be sort of in the middle of you anyway as you bounce it, so it's not like you have to bounce and then change hands. Personally, I'm right-handed but left-footed. So I bounce with my right hand and kick with my left foot anyway. So it's sort of, and that doesn't impact at all the bounce. So it's sort of one of those things that I wouldn't worry too much around bouncing. It's a fun little activity though. It's a fun thing to challenge kids with, like how you can do it with your preferred. Okay, try and do it with your non-preferred, and then it sort of, the skill breaks down. It's pretty hard, and they go, oh yeah, okay, and they'll try and figure that out. Whereas the other sports, like a basketball, it's pretty important to be able to bounce on your left, but with footy, it's not as important, I wouldn't imagine.
And it gets to the point where bouncing the ball is quite autonomous, and you find you'll do the same action over and over again, and you liken it to if you ask someone to brush their teeth with their opposite hand. Very, very hard, very difficult, it's so simple, yet it's so difficult because we're just not used to it. So look, it couldn't hurt to introduce it, but I wouldn't be making it a priority personally.
Yeah. I got another question here. At this age group, the kids want to emulate the sports that they see, and a lot of them say, when are we going to play a real game? When are we going to play a proper game of AFL? What advice would you have for teachers who have got students asking those questions?
I mean, games are very important. I mean, you always modify them, and because you might have some, whatever your learning outcomes are. I mean, that's what we would advocate from our junior coaching side of things, is that the way sessions are structured, we would encourage there's always a form of a game at the end, but it may just be a modified game for the kids. And again, the more you use, say, small-sided games, or you gamify the fundamental activities that you're doing, that can kind of keep that at bay a little bit, because they're so engaged. Like, the more engaged that the children are, the less likely you're going to start to hear a bit of that. It's sort of like if they're standing at the back of lines, or they're just waiting around, that's when that can come into play. But I would definitely encourage that you use games at the end. It's sort of, there's different ways to cut it up, but whole part whole, ways you can teach skill. But really for us, it's like fundamentally the skill fits in within the game. And even if they can't do everything, there's still the opportunity to play. But we know that there are kids, some might be what we call match contesters, who are just rearing to go and ready to go for the game. They've got all the skills. Other kids at the other end might be what we would term skill developers. So they're still learning those skills. So within your session that you have, you just want to make sure that you've got opportunities for all of them to kind of get what they want out of it. So for a skill developer, the high repetition areas of your training or of your session are really, really valuable for them, because they're going to learn all of the skills, and they're going to get lots of opportunities to put that skill into practice. So they might get 60, 70 touches of the ball just in that section, because when it comes to the game, they may not quite get as much as involved. But then that's where the match contesters are rearing to go and ready for that. So it's sort of like within an activity, you may have some kids heavily involved and some other kids may not be quite ready, but across a whole session, if you're able to make sure that you're hitting the skill developers and the match contesters, then you've got a really well-rounded session where all of the kids are actually engaged and get lots of touches, which will help their skills. But I think games are very important, and the kids want them, so let's make sure that we give it to them.
Yeah. And what about for a teacher who's never played AFL, never taught it before? What advice would you have to those teachers as they approach doing this?
Well, firstly, check out the website. There are plenty of resources there for you. Genuinely, like over 77 resources available. That's money for jam, really, because it's all there for you and explaining the skills. But educate yourself in terms of just watching the game, watching the clips if you're a visual learner, and then trying it yourself, because we're not all experts at every sport. It's just not realistic. As long as those teaching points, especially in those videos there, the step, push, all those sorts of things, those key words, you'll find that they'll be really beneficial when teaching, and identify those teaching moments. If a student does something really well, highlight it, show it, and don't be afraid to lean on a student that's really skillful. They may be more skillful than you, and that's okay. If you've got little Bobby who is really, really good at handballing, pull out little Bobby at the front and say, why is he so good at this? What is he doing well? What teaching point is this? Where's his bread? Where's his pancake? Things like that. So don't be afraid to call on the kids that do play or are involved or do Oz kick or whatever it might be. And that's as simple as, who's done this before? Who's played before? Yep, great. And then tapping into that.
And just to build on that, I think that's where the exploration and play parts of this are really, really valuable. If you as a teacher or as a coach don't feel as confident around your knowledge around some of the skills, facilitating an environment where kids are able to explore themselves and play, that removes you from needing to be kind of the sage on the stage or the expert standing up there saying, this is the way we must do things, because then you can just guide. There's that sort of guided discovery approach. You can ask really good questions. You put yourself as a bit of a facilitator. So you're able to say, what happens if you kick the ball like that? Or, and in these ones is what happens if you hit the ball on that part? Where does it go? Oh, what happens if you bounce and it lands on the point? Where did that go? Oh, well, what if you try something else? And so you're just guiding them through it. Certainly, the more knowledge you have, the easier it is, because you know where to direct your attention. But the resources that we've got across our schools team are really awesome, and they'll set you up for that. And then you can sort of sit there as a bit of a guide for the students and just ask them really good questions that get them to further explore the skill. And I think that's really good advice, and removes a little bit of the worry that you might have about needing to be the expert across all of them.
Yeah, great advice. We've always got kids who want to get out the front and be the star. So that's a great technique. But there's certainly plenty of resources in there. And we do have one last question about the role of assessment. I feel like we've talked a little bit about some of the formative assessment techniques that you can use to, I guess, guide the next steps that you take and potentially what you would do in the next lesson. But what about summative type assessment? What role, what types of assessment do you think are helpful in coaching AFL?
When I think of assessment, so like I can see the question there around assessing the students in game situations. So probably from a skill acquisition point of view, the game is kind of everything. The skills are there so you can play the game. And when you're watching someone handball or bounce or kick or mark, until you see it actually in a game situation, and this is probably getting a little bit higher up, with sort of the younger kids, you probably don't have to worry about it too much, just you can kind of let them go. But certainly as they get a bit older and you're starting to look at, where do I need to support these kids in their skill development, seeing them in a game and that representative setting, representative of the game, is where you can actually see where things might break down. So maybe they can't handball with their non-dominant hand because every time you see them in a game, if they're right-handed, they turn and they handball like that rather than handballing across themselves. And so that allows you then, as a teacher or as a coach, to set up a session whereby you can kind of constrain it so they have to start using their other hand to handball. But you obviously you can't necessarily see that when you're just doing things in a really linear manner. There's game situations, and then there's also training. You can set training up to do that as well by creating, what we would call representative training design. So training that is designed, or sessions that are designed to look like the game. And you can do that even in small-sided things, which means you get lots and lots of repetitions of it. So as a coach or as a teacher, you can sit there and watch, and you're getting lots of views of what's actually happening, which gives you a really good chance to kind of assess what's happening and then figure out where you need to support the players or kids. And so I would probably agree with that. You need to make it as representative possible, because I can watch someone kick or handball between each other and think, that person's a really good handball. And then it comes to putting them under a little bit of pressure and a bit of a game situation, it sort of all falls apart. And you go, okay, I now know where I need to work with them on in the skill.
Yep, terrific. Steph, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I am. It's a really good question. And it really just depends what your success criteria looks like, I suppose, for that particular skill. And like Sam said, the skill, in isolation could be really good, and then gets to a game and it's game sense and it's invasion and the environment changes and there's variables that you can't control, and it is really difficult. So I think there's scope to assess students, in a more closed environment with just the basic fundamentals, and then, making comment on how they actually go with the skills in a game sense situation. But it is really difficult. It's a very tough sport to play. That's a reality. And, you can get some success in isolation with the fundamentals, but then you go to a game and, it all falls apart a little bit. So obviously that's where, there's ability and talent and things like that do play a part. You've got an invasion sport where, game sense knowledge is really important as well. It comes, if you're handballing on your opposite hand, well, that's because you've got pressure coming from another side, or is it tackling? Is it not tackling? There are just so many variables. So I think there's scope to assess in both situations and make comment on both situations. And obviously that's all linked to the curriculum anyway. But yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a big challenge, especially with AFL.
And of course, the resources have plenty of options for teachers and students. A lot of self-reflection was something that AFL wanted included. So lots of resources in there. Steph and Sam, thank you so much for all that advice and experience. Really great value. So as well as all of the on-field learning, teachers can also take the learning into the classroom with the off-field module. Is a lesson focused on building leadership skills. We have a video to share with you now, another wonderful video that can be used with your students and gives you a taste of what's covered in the classroom lesson. Let's have a look.
Hi Sophie, hi Jenny.
Hi Steph.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you.
That's good. I'm very excited to talk to you about leadership today.
So, let's talk leadership. So what's the definition of leadership?
That's a fantastic question. I think there's many definitions for leadership, but there's some key words that are really important. I think it's about action, it's about leading by example and trying to bring people with you, to achieve a common goal.
And Steph, what do you think makes a great leader?
I think someone who is approachable and can communicate makes a really good leader, as well as someone who can build relationships with people to then achieve a common goal. What do you think makes a good leader?
Maybe a leader is who does the right thing for everyone.
So what are some examples at school where someone could show leadership, do you think? Maybe in the classroom or even outside?
Maybe like if you're stuck, they'll help you.
Yeah, stuck with some schoolwork or have any questions and things like that. What else? How about in the schoolyard? Can you think of anything that would show leadership in the schoolyard?
They can help people in need, such as like they're stuck somewhere.
Yeah, excellent. So helping others.
Hey Steph, do you think a coach is a leader?
I definitely think a coach is a leader. They're someone that has to work with lots of people. They're a leader of people and a team. So they need to make sure that they communicate and get that team on the same page to achieve their ultimate goal.
So Steph, can people in your team that aren't the captain be a leader?
Absolutely they can be. It's a team sport, so we actually rely on each other to lead, not just one person. And I always talk about the fact that just because we have a leadership group doesn't mean that everyone else isn't leaders, because if we want to achieve our goals, we need everybody to be on the same page.
So what are the most important decisions you have to make as leader?
It's a great question. I think for me as the captain, sometimes it's choosing which way to kick if I win the coin toss at the start, because sometimes it's windy. But I think it's important that you have a good balance between being someone's friend and then being able to pull them up on things if things aren't going well. And I think that's really important as a leader. So that's a tricky part, but very, very important in a team sport.
So Steph, do you have a leadership role model?
I do, and it's not in the sporting industry. It's a little bit left field, but it's actually Oprah Winfrey, who is an American show host, but has done so much for the community, and a lot of her principles and what she stands for really resonates with me as a leader. She's a woman of the people and trying to get the best out of people, and as well as pave the way for minority groups, and I think she's really inspirational.
What about you, Steph? Any advice for us?
I think it's really important that you be your own person and you stay true to yourself and what you value, and to be really respectful of your classmates, your teachers, your guardians, parents, and your environment.
That's amazing advice. Thank you for talking to us.
No, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Very cute. The in-class lesson for Year 3 and 4 is focused on leading others. Students will focus on understanding the importance of respect and the qualities needed to be a good leader. The lesson is 40 minutes or so and includes relevant vocabulary, learning outcomes and student success criteria. The lesson moves from playing games to a classroom discussion to a mini research task, and it ends with a reflection and some suggestions to extend the learnings. So another great resource. And lastly, we'd like to draw your attention to one more program that's been developed to work alongside the on and off-field modules. Healthy Kicks is a program that's been developed with Coles and focuses on the benefit of healthy eating and nutrition. It's a 5-week program for Foundation to Year 6 that explores the 5 food groups, the importance of fueling the body before and after exercise, meal planning, food and culture, and how to get creative in the kitchen. There are also a set of at-home learning activities, so you can send home with your students or email the parents to get them involved. For those interested in reading more about the play-based learning, we recommend this piece of literature, a great article if you're interested in finding out more. And that brings us to the end of the session today. A huge thank you to all the teachers from across the country who've joined us today. We hope you've got some useful takeaways from the session and that you'll be able to facilitate the teaching of AFL with your students in the classroom. All of the resources that have been discussed today can be found at the address that's on the screen. And if you teach more than one year level, or you're just interested in learning about the other AFL skills, join us for the next session on Tuesday, the 22nd of November, where the skill of kicking will be discussed in much more detail, and I'm looking forward to that one. And of course, we must thank our guests. What a wealth of knowledge and experience you bring. We've been so fortunate to have you join us today. Feedback on this session is welcome, and we'll be sending out a survey to gather your thoughts and opinions. It'll only take a few minutes of your time, and it helps us to improve our offerings to teachers in the future. Thanks for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening.